the star of Don's show. There's just one.
Yeah, that way that's your project for. What are our activities? That's the project, that's the next project that's due Monday.
Exactly how things have changed, what have remained the same since he was in the journal.
Thank you.
Not a problem. If you have anything.
Exposed to content that challenges, informs, and ultimately educates, which makes for a more robust learning environment here at UNT. So on behalf of the Distinguished Lecture Series Committee, I would like to thank you all for being here tonight. Now, if any of you are unaware, there's an election going on currently in our nation. Sometimes between everything said by the candidates, the reporters, pundits, and other talking heads, people can feel confused and even cynical about the election process. The program this evening is designed to help us make some sense of it all and hopefully to have some fun along the way. But before I introduce our speakers, I would like to introduce tonight's moderator. Dr. Kimmy King is a distinguished teaching professor of political science here at UNT. Her areas of expertise include human and civil rights, international law, conflict resolution, gender studies, and sexual violence. Dr. King has also participated in a variety of research and programs in The Hague for the International War Crimes Tribunal for the conflicts in the former Yugoslavia. Please join me in a round of applause for Dr. Kimmy King. Our speakers for this evening are well qualified to shed some light on American politics for us. Carl Bernstein is an accomplished journalist and author whose work has revealed the hidden stories of the government, leaders, and politics in Washington, D.C. While working for the Washington Post, Carl Bernstein and fellow journalist Bob Woodward broke the news of the Watergate scandal in the early 1970s, leading to the resignation of President Nixon and setting the standard for modern investigative reporting, for which they and the Post were awarded the Pulitzer Prize. Carl Bernstein is also the author of the national bestseller, A Woman in Charge, The Life of Hillary Rodham Clinton, which has been acclaimed as the definitive biography on its subject. P.J. O'Rourke has established himself as America's premier political satirist. He is the best-selling author of 16 books and has more than 1 million words of journalism to his name. P.J. O'Rourke has more citations in the Penguin Dictionary of Humorous Quotations than any living writer today, and he has been hailed as the funniest writer in America by both Time Magazine and the Wall Street Journal. Now please join me in welcoming to the stage Carl Bernstein and P.J. O'Rourke.
Now I'm going center.
I'm not P.J. O'Rourke. But it really takes somebody like P.J. to capture the essence of where we are today, because this really is the election from hell. And it's hard to parse humor from something as tragic and as much a travesty as this particular election is. And yet PJ is capable of it. But we're at a place, and we'll discuss it tonight, and hopefully participation will be thorough from you all with us, rather than us talking at you. But this is a time to look at America, because this election is not just about Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, but it really is a look at ourselves and where our political culture is today, where our media culture is today, where we are as a country and our citizenry is today. So I'd like to throw a few ideas out about this election, but I want to start and ask something about this audience. How many people here want to see Hillary Clinton elected the next president of the United States? And how many want to see Donald Trump elected the next president of the United States? Okay, we know the crowd we've got. And how many are enthusiastic about Hillary Clinton as a candidate for president of the United States? And how many enthusiastic about Trump? And how many would rather if we had had two different candidates? I rest my case. So how do we get to this place? How do we get to a place, wow, where two candidates for president of the United States are probably disdained in a way by most Americans, in a manner in which both candidates running for the presidency in a presidential election have never been. It's been a long time coming. And I would suggest that as anomalous as Donald Trump might seem and is, there also is a certain logic in terms of where we are coming from in this election, going back the last 20, 25 years in America, that lends a certain plausibility to this outrageous situation in a country, the greatest country on earth, 320 million people, and the two candidates that are fielded by the two parties are not regarded highly, to say the least, by most of the electorate. Well, our political system obviously hasn't been working for a long time, but we have to look as well, not just at the politicians, it seems to me, but at the people of the country as well. It's very easy to blame the politicians for the conditions of our political system, the fact that the Congress of the United States is a broken institution and has been for 30 years or more. Excuse me. I think we also, and we can get on to the press, and we'll talk about the press, whether or not it does its job well. But let's also ask the question, are we doing our jobs as citizens well? And I would suggest that we've been in a spiral in this country, culturally, in which, through the culture wars of the last 20, 25 years, people increasingly are looking not for what I, as a journalist, call the best obtainable version of the truth about the real existing conditions in the country, about the candidates for office, about the institutions in our country and whether they're working or not, but rather people have been looking for easy answers to tough questions, but particularly looking for information that buttresses and is used as ammunition for preconceived notions that we already have, religious beliefs, cultural beliefs. So we're not open to the truth nearly to the extent that we were, say, at the time of Watergate, when Richard Nixon, a Republican president, resigned office with a consensus in the country that he was a criminal and had to resign office. And it did not have to do with whether he was a Republican or a Democrat, but rather that he was a criminal president of the United States. And that the system had worked in such a way that the institutions of government, the citizenry, the press, all had functioned, all had played their role. And perhaps it's the last time that we were able to see the system work so well in this country. Imagine, we now have in Donald Trump, and I'll talk about Hillary Clinton in a moment. PJ will certainly have some reflections on Hillary Clinton. We are now in a situation where the nominee of one of the two major parties for President of the United States is a neo-fascist, has run a demagogic, bigoted, racist campaign, nativist, and there's been a lot of talk about the press and saying, oh, well, the press is taking sides in this election. I think you can go back to this notion of what is the best obtainable version of the truth about Donald Trump. It is that he's a bigot in his rhetoric, in how he's run his campaign. It is that it's been an appeal to a kind of a peculiarly American kind of neo-fascism, the ultimate leader. The hell with the Constitution. I'll do this, I'll do that. We haven't seen this in our history by a nominee for president of the United States. And whatever the case, whether he wins or loses, he is going to get 40% of the vote in this country. That's astonishing. A con man who is incapable almost of speaking the truth, but there's a certain logic, a certain consistency of those who have come before with so-called dog whistles, particularly, I would say, in the Republican Party, appealing to some of the same nativist, bigoted notions, but with a little more polite language. I'm not about to say that the whole Republican Party or anything like it is committed to a racist agenda or anything like it, but too much of it has been. And so that there's a certain almost logic in our celebrity culture as well to Donald Trump being a reflection of the values of a celebrity culture. And Hillary Clinton, incidentally, is also, here we have somebody in Donald Trump who really has always wanted to be the most famous man in America and has managed to succeed in doing it. Hillary Clinton has been the most famous woman in the world now for going on a quarter century, 20 years. And she too is judged very often not by taking a real look at her life and who she is and what she's done and what she hasn't done and what she's really said and what she hasn't said, but also very much judged by the values of a celebrity culture. And I think one of the things we're seeing in this election is overly simplistic conclusions about the two candidates, partly because I think the press, and it's very hard to generalize about the press. I think New York Times, the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal have done some great reporting on both Trump and Hillary Clinton. The press, I think, generally has been very rough on Hillary Clinton in terms of, certainly I have, in terms of a server and what it represents. As I say in my book, A Woman in Charge, since her days in Arkansas, Hillary Rodham Clinton has had a difficult relationship to the truth. And I think what we've seen in this election, unfortunately, is rather than those really quite wonderful aspects of her life and character that manifested themselves and were much more apparent earlier in her journey across the public consciousness. In this campaign, we've seen the worst of it. I went back last night and read, I've never gone back to read a book that I've written before, but I went back last night because I was trying to put together something excerpted for maybe about 100 pages of A Woman in Charge. And reading it over, I was astonished how much was in there about all that we had seen in this campaign about her. It goes to the worst aspects of her, and it goes to the secrecy. It goes to lying to get out of jams of her own making. And there are many reasons for what some regard as the rational and others regard as the irrational hatred of Hillary Clinton in this country. But again, I think there's also a logic to it because of the cultural warfare and the fact that the Clintons themselves have been in the crosshairs of the cultural wars now for 30 years. But she has brought much of this on herself in this election. That is what is so apparent to me. And when I wrote the book, what I was struck by were really the history of her life, beginning when she was a young woman, really has been about four forces that define her, that have defined her. Religion. She is a deeply religious person. Carries a Bible with her, underlines it, looks for parables, uses religion as a balm and as a kind of way of balancing herself, of finding an ease and a stability in the midst of crisis, particularly. She grew up in a kind of Wesleyan, and John Wesley, his admonition, founder of Methodism, to do all the good you can, wherever you can, wherever you can, for as many people as you can. She took this to heart. Her father was a Goldwater conservative, like Donald Trump's father. Hers was a bigot, used epithets at the dinner table to describe African Americans. She went to hear Martin Luther King when she was a teenager, and that changed her life. And the course of her life thereafter became about really public service. The idea of public service is at the core, or has been at the core of who she is in many regards. And I think here too in this campaign we've seen almost an abandonment of that course in her life, or rather a kind of assiduous striving to win the presidency at all costs. And one of the things that's so interesting to me, and I'm going to stop and let PJ talk here, about this election is that despite the demagoguery, neo-fascism, the racism, Donald Trump, like Bernie Sanders, somehow recognized that millions and millions of Americans are alienated, have been forgotten by the so-called elites, that our institutions in this country have not been working. We were talking earlier in a classroom, what institutions in this country really are working? Tech? Entertainment? I'm not sure you can come up with many others after that. It's an astonishing thing for this country. So the election takes place in this moment as Trump has identified, as Bernie Sanders has identified, this, and Hillary was very slow to recognize the alienation of so many Americans who have been forgotten. And it's astonishing that someone of her background and of her ability in previous parts of her life to recognize and feel the difficulties of ordinary working Americans, how she came so late to the recognition of that fact in this election. So I'm just going to set the table a little bit with those ideas, and PJ will have, I hope, a more upbeat look at this aspect of where we are, and then we'd love to answer your questions and have a fun discussion, if it's possible, in the midst of the elections of hell. Thank you.
Well, one thing that's important to remember about the awful candidates that we wound up with is that we didn't have any good candidates to begin with. In fact, how many did we, about 110? I don't. I just remember thinking, who are these jacklegs, these highbinders, these wire pullers, and mountebanks, swellheads, bunkum spigots, boodle artists, four-flushers, and animated spittoons offering themselves as worthy of America's highest office? I mean, you know, it took us, 2 years almost to narrow it down to 5. Hard work and, in a way, kind of heroic work. We managed to get it down to 5. Cruz, Rubio, Kasich, Clinton, Sanders, and Trump. Now, that's not a list of presidential candidates. That's the worst law firm in the world. That's a law firm that couldn't get Caitlyn Jenner off on a charge of Bruce Jenner identity theft. Back when the early larval stages of this election, it seemed as though inevitably the two candidates would be Jeb Bush and Hillary Clinton. And I trembled for my country. I mean, because the electorate would go into the voting booth and they would see the names Bush and Clinton, and they would think to themselves, gosh, I'm getting forgetful, I did this already. And they would leave without marking the ballot. And the shuttle from the local old age home would transport some senile Republicans to the polls. A Democratic National Committee bus would collect some derelicts from Skid Row, and we would have the first president of the United States elected by a franchise limited to sufferers from Alzheimer's disease and drunken bums. What happened to Jeb, anyway? Maybe you Texans know. I sure don't. I mean, Jeb had it all. He's young for a Republican. He's a Phi Beta Kappa, a successful businessman, and he's a former governor of Florida, a state where balloting incompetence and corruption are vital to the GOP. Plus, he was rolling like a dirty dog in campaign contributions, you know, and then it all went wrong. And Hillary, it turned out even Hillary did not have a lock on her nomination. She came up against, of all people, the screwy, kablooey commander of the Vermont Kong, Bernie Sanders. You know, Bernie says he wants to make America more like Europe. Great idea, because Europe has had a swell track record for 100 years now, you know? Ever since Archduke Ferdinand's car got a flattened Sarajevo in 1914. Make America more like Europe. Where do you even go to get all the Nazis and commies and 90 million dead people that it would take to make America more like Europe, you know? Meanwhile, Hillary's carrying more baggage than the Boeing she used as Secretary of State, visiting every country that later blew up in her face in her quest to fulfill the mission of the U.S. Secretary of State, which is to accumulate frequent flyer miles. She had Julian Assange set up her State Department email server. She put the Dalai Lama on security duty at the U.S. consulate in Benghazi. Geopolitical conflicts of interest at the Clinton Foundation are so large they have to be weighed on Chris Christie's bathroom scale. And at any moment, that ferret of a husband of hers, he might slip his leash and get up to old tricks, run up the pants legs of young interns. Now, on the upside, to be fair, Hillary is familiar with the White House. She knows where the extra toilet paper is stored. She knows where the spare key is to the new missile launch briefcase. She knows where that's hidden. That's it. It's on the Truman balcony, second pillar from the left. And this leaves us with Donald Trump. Now, I support Trump. I support Trump because of something the great political satirist H.L. Mencken said. Mencken said, democracy is the theory that the common people know what they want and deserve to get it good and hard. Now, Trump's chief domestic policy goal, that's going to be on TV. That's what he wants most. And you know, if he becomes president, he'll be able to be on TV all the time, 24/7. But this might not be so bad. I mean, just spraying his hair during commercial breaks will keep Trump too busy to push any other bird-brain domestic policy scheme. You know? Then imagine Trump's foreign policy. Okay? Here's a guy who's under the illusion he's about 10 times richer than he actually is, who believes Obama was born in Kazakhstan to the Queen of Sheba and raised by Islamicist wolves in the remote forests of Harvard Law School. Russia, China, Iran, ISIS, the Taliban, and Hamas will be paralyzed with fear, because who knows what this lunatic is going to do. Well, what he'll do is build hundreds of Trump casinos, Trump hotels, and Trump resorts in Moscow, Beijing, Tehran, Raqqa, Kandahar, and the Gaza Strip. And then all of them will go bankrupt the way Trump Taj Mahal, Trump Plaza Hotel, and Trump Entertainment Resorts do. Trump's going to leave Russia trying to palm off eastern Ukraine on angry bondholders, and China auctioning distressed property in the Spratly Islands. this might work. Although I personally seriously doubt it.
So one of the things that's so fascinating is that they were speaking with the students earlier, and they have this really wonderful rapport between them from traveling and speaking. And so we're going to take some of your questions and mix in some others, and I have a couple here as well. But one of the first questions I wanted to ask you is, rather than blame the media first, I mean, we have a circus in this election cycle. What is the path forward out of this culture of craziness? Or have we upped the ante so much that there's simply no turning back? Is there any hope for future elections, or is it always going to be a bunch of whack jobs happening?
Well, you know, you have to look at everything in its own time. I don't think we know where we're going to go after this election. I think for the first time there is a suggestion, first time in a number of weeks, that Hillary Clinton might really have an edge in this election. Now, we've been wrong, both PJ and myself, as well as most of the
Completely
press,
wrong about everything for 18 months. So take this prediction with that grain of
Right,
salt.
exactly. It's not a prediction, because I think indeed, to think that Donald Trump can't win this election is not to be thinking straight, because I think there's a real chance he can. But I think also for the first time, maybe Hillary Clinton is putting a little daylight between the two of them. We'll see. Still got 4 weeks to go. But I think we're also going through a generational, I hope to hell is the last throes of our generation in terms of having designs on the American presidency. I also think that my generation, I'm 72, PJ's 69, that we have left, despite all the remarkable civil rights revolution, gay rights revolution, women's movement, and what our generation and with our parents did with the great post-World War II boom that followed, and taking advantage of America's incredible second half of the 20th century. But we also have broken the system and left you all with a mess. You who are students. You don't have the opportunities that we had. Our parents had the GI Bill. There's nothing comparable that you have. The cost of living for young people today and what's accessible to have a wonderful life is, in terms of material and aspects, and what you have to do to earn it and to get jobs, and is a terrible struggle. And it's a result partly of the short-sightedness and selfishness of our generation. So my hope, in terms of your question, is that in the interim 4 years, and incidentally, I do think there's a chance that if Hillary Clinton is elected, possible she could be a good president. She's knowledgeable. Maybe she will see her election as some kind of redemptive act. I would hope that she would look at the way she has run this campaign and turn her back perhaps on aspects of the way she has chosen to move in public life over the last 10 years or so. And also I think she's a terrific Secretary of State in some regards, as a great ambassador for America. In terms of policy making, she was shut out policy making by the Obama National Security Council apparatus and by the president himself. But I think that hopefully in these next 4 years that there will be some leadership to look at the real problems and potentials of America. And I'm talking about institutionally, not just in the political system. That we need leadership in the institutions of America. Leadership that we have not seen in recent years. But I think a lot of it is going to have to be demanded by your generation.
She's going to be a terrible
That's
president.
my hope.
She's just going to be an absolute terrible president. Hillary is the very embodiment of the endless expansion of the political world. Politics just keeps on growing in size and scope and expense. I mean, to take a current example, transgender bathrooms. Now, we all know politics is crap. Now we found out that where we take a crap is a political issue. It just keeps going and it never stops. It is now to the point where 1/3 of world GDP is spent by the world's politicians. 1 out of every 3 things you make is disposed of by politicians, under the control of politicians. Your cat has 3 kittens, 1 of them is a government agent. Hillary is the, hey, isn't this great? Let's make politics even more powerful. Let's make politics even more expensive. Let's make it intrude into even more corners of our life. Trump, there's not much there as a person. I think calling him a neo-fascist is to give him much too much intellectual credibility. He does not rise to that level. He has no theory. He merely, really, he's an entertainer. He's an entertainer, and that's all. An unpleasant entertainer.